Pyrite.
Yes, thanks, Ciarán Comhairle. You know, I think the Minister will understand that there is no maybe fanfare today when it was exactly a year to the day that we read the press release from his department that up to 50 million in bank loans and levies to pay for the repair of Pyrite homes was on the cards. It was followed up by the Minister for Finance telling us that the victims of Pyrite homes were going to get their property tax sorted out as well. And I know the Minister's press statement from that day, where he said, and I quote, "While much more remains to be done to complete the jigsaw, I'm confident that the end is now in sight for affected homeowners." Well, I'm not blaming you entirely personally for that fact, but you will appreciate that there's a lot of people who will say, we've heard this announcement many times before. We had the scenario where the Pyrite Resolution Board website was launched to another fanfare in May. We had the original sums of 50 million downgraded to 10 million, and to be honest, the 50 million wasn't enough in any way. And now we have a year on, and still no applications have been accepted to this point in time. And we have to be conscious of the families out there, many of whom are desperately hoping that this is the pathway to a solution of this issue. And I firmly believe that we need the scheme up and running in order to be able to adjudicate whether that is in fact the case or not. So on that basis, I most certainly am supporting the legislation, because it is necessary to give the legislative basis for the remediation. But whether the remediation is adequate, I don't think it will be. Well, if nothing else but to prove you wrong in some instances, because we have to be mindful of the fact that many families have already paid hundreds of euros, some thousands, in getting tests done. They have completed the building condition assessment. They've been evaluated as Category 2 damage. Their houses are deteriorating rapidly as each day goes by, and yet the Pyrite Resolution Board still cannot accept applications. Now, the Minister is telling us that once this legislation is in, it'll lay the basis for that happening. But as I said, we've heard that before, and we really need that delivered upon, and delivered upon urgently. Now, I just want to deal with a couple of points referenced by the Minister and the bigger picture. Again, the Minister made the same point that he's made every time since he got elected and since we discussed this issue, that the state is not responsible. And again, we have to correct him in that regard, because in the same way as nobody ever said that the state actually organised for this to happen, the sad reality is that negligence by the state and the state authorities which were to oversee regulations was a contributing factor to this situation. The Building Regulation Advisory Board and the National Standards Authority of Ireland bragged in their literature that they were on top of all of the best practice and technical expertise and keeping abreast of international developments, yet somehow they didn't know about pyrite, which had been found in Britain and which had been found in Canada many years previously. There was a knowledge of the geological composition of the Tuberculine Peninsula in particular being susceptible to pyrite and so on, and quarries being located on that rim. That was an area, if you like, where the state, in my opinion, were culpable and found wanting. I think the state's own actions in subsequent years, by the very fact that the aggregates panel had to devise a new standard in this area, was an admission that the existing standard simply wasn't good enough, and de facto you've acknowledged it. I think the fact that Premier Insurance, the second largest insurer in the state, won't insure properties up to that new Irish standard is indicative that even the new standard, to be honest, is not good enough. And to be honest, it's not surprising, because the aggregates panel are made up of precisely the people from the cement and concrete industry, including many of the quarry owners whose quarries have been deemed to be legally responsible for this material ending up in the market. So another vested interest exposed in Irish society. Now, we have limited time here, but one of the biggest offenders in this debacle has to be home bond, and I'm glad the Minister gave some time to it, but sorry that he didn't address the points that we've been systematically making. Home bond posed itself, set up by the Construction Industry Federation, as a structural guarantee, and it wasn't. There were warnings put in the public domain as early as 2000 that this scheme was in difficulty and had a financial problem in that regard. It was allowed to continue. Now, it is a fact that home bond are now obviously a proper insurance scheme over the last 3 or 4 years. So the funds in its kitty now, there are no further draws on that other than potentially Pyrite. So why are we allowing a situation that they sit on a 25 million bank balance and this kicking off of this scheme is a paltry 10 million? It just doesn't make any sense. What makes a greater insult onto homeowners is the fact that this organisation, which closed the door on these families, turned down their claims, told them they didn't have Pyrite, or walked away when Pyrite was established and when the court said the quarries were responsible. Then they said, OK, you do have Pyrite, but you know what? It's not our responsibility anymore. And the idea that these people might have an expertise and might somehow be involved in the remediation process is absolutely an abhorrent prospect for homeowners, and they will not wash it. Now, I appreciate that this scheme is putting the skeleton before us, and that we'll get the details of the scheme later on, and we can maybe deal with some of that at report stage tomorrow. But I do think there are a couple of glaring omissions. There are families in this state who've paid tens of thousands of euros to do these works themselves, and they didn't do it because they were rich or they'd nothing better to do it with their money. They had to do it because there was no other way in which they could make their homes safe. They've been excluded from the provisions of this bill, and you know, Pyrite Action and the homeowners lobbying on this haven't given up the ghost for those homeowners. They do need justice, and in the same way that the Minister correctly has clauses in this that the industry should be gone after legally to foot the bill, then I think, and if compensation is got from one form, that it should be written off. The same should apply to homeowners. I think an issue has raised as well about who is eligible to access this scheme. The Minister has properly said before that those who have exploited all other avenues, but there's a question mark now over those who've maybe initiated court action in desperation. Are they now to be prevented from accessing the scheme? We need clarification on that. I'm glad that houses in category 1 are being included. I'm glad that some that don't fit the bill are being included, but I have to say, Minister, that all along it's been argued that the only real way to deal with this is a state-led, systematic, state-by-state approach, rather than the individual case approach that is being copper-fastened in the legislation today. And I think we will find that out to our detriment. But that said, there is an urgent need to get these applications live for safety, and on that basis we will be supporting the bill, although moving amendments at report stage.
Thank you very much.